Hey guys, I was watching Sky News for news of Jay Slater and I stumbled upon a case, and it's a trial that is going on right now in the UK, Gavin Plumb. And his phone was seized, and it really does provide a window into the depths of depravity.
I got nightmares in my head, I fear thoughts build up until I can't breathe. My mind fills up into a creature, and it haunts me somewhere much deeper. I got nightmares in my head, I fear.
Hello and welcome to True Crime Rocket Science, the most authentic community in true crime. By the way, would you say that you part of that authentic community, that you can think critically and you do have a sense of loyalty and commitment and discernment? Would you say you part of that community, or not really, just sort of a coming and going kind of person? Anyway, it is the most authentic community as well, or we try to be, in true crime. Now, we often hear about shoddy police work. It's in so many cases, especially the Karen Reid case. Well, this is a truly remarkable case where undercover work very likely prevented a serious and despicable crime. And I mean, that is the best kind of police work you get, is where the investigation actually prevents a crime from taking place. How often do you see that happening? Now, besides setting a trap, you had an undercover officer. I think he was based in Minnesota. I mean, you actually had an American cop working with the British cops, right? It's pretty incredible. And he was posing on the dark web as a sort of sadistic person and basically as a potential accomplice. And thanks to a convincing virtual performance, British cops were able to track down Gavin Plumb to his home in Pottersfield in Harlow, Essex, confront him. And this is the part that's actually quite fascinating. They seized Plumb's phone while it was unlocked, and they actually scrolled through it, recording what was on it using their body cameras. Brilliant, brilliant police work. Now, according to The Guardian, quote, "The court previously heard that Plumb was arrested after he unknowingly communicated with an undercover police officer based in the US who raised the alarm with UK authorities. A search of Plumb's home found items including sexualized paraphernalia, chloroform, cable ties, and a folding knife, as well as a mobile phone with more than 10,000 images of a particular person, a celebrity known as Holly Willoughby." Now, the result is that we have a unique, undeleted, unscrubbed, unsanitized insight into a sexual sadist living amongst us, and worse, one who is clearly coordinating his horror show with others of the same ilk. Before we get to the rest of this analysis, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, please do. By the way, if you're someone who's been following the Rex Heuermann case, you'd really want to pay attention to this. This guy kind of looks like a younger version of him, doesn't it? It even looks a little bit like Keegan Kline. And so this analysis, I think, provides a sparkling clear, if darkly disturbing, potential insight into a much older, but as I say, oddly similar looking ogre on the other side of the pond. For those in Britain, we're talking about Rex Heuermann, the prime suspect in the Long Island serial killer case. So if you're enjoying this analysis, please like, share, leave a comment. You can also hit the thanks button, and let's get started. Now, in the Rex Heuermann series, we started down the path of what is going down, what is happening in the criminal mind. How do the gears work? Well, now we're going to jump right into the nuts and bolts of that nightmare. What are we actually dealing with? Well, according to the article, the court heard that the 37-year-old security guard discussed on WhatsApp with a man who went by the name of Mark, believed to be based in Ireland, about mounting a home invasion at Holly Willoughby's address, and they were discussing the logistics. For example, what are the blind spots where they could gain access? What were the sort of weak points in terms of security where potentially they could hop over the wall? Now, I must say, Gavin Plumb is not the most sprightly fellow I've ever seen. But that is certainly something you can do right now to secure yourself. Stand in your own garden or in your own home and identify weak spots in terms of your own security. Sort them out and fix them. I was actually in my garden the other day. I'd actually locked myself in and I was trying to figure out how to get out and I couldn't solve the problem. Well, you need to be in that situation. Now, Plum was actually saying online, that's all I need to get a rough idea her address. I've got a rough idea of her address, so I'm going to find and track her movements for a simple place to strike. But I think a home invasion is a better idea. And I think what he was angling at is he's not going to do some kind of attack in broad daylight. He's going to, I guess, wait for her at her home or something like that. And then he said, I might even take a ball. So if I'm caught, I'll say I'm getting it back. So basically throw a ball into a garden. And then if something happens, he can say, oh, I was just retrieving my ball. And this is all in terms of messages found on his phone that were read to the jury. Asked by Mark in December 2021 for how long he had wanted to attack the British TV presenter, the defendant said about 3 years, but people claim to want to and then back out. Now, one of the tricky parts of this is trying to make it clear that this guy was determined, that he was purposeful, and that he was plotting and planning in a lot of detail what he was about to do, that he wasn't just someone who's sitting at home daydreaming and kind of almost like wishful thinking, but in the criminal sense. Now, besides the fact that some of these men seem to indulge in these fantasies with other deviants online, egging one another on, it's clear that the fixation and fantasy reaches such a level of compulsive obsession that the would-be perpetrator simply can no longer hold back their impulses. This is something we were talking about with Rex Heuermann, but what does it actually look like? What does it actually feel like? Well, the next step becomes the ultimate rush, having these fantasies, these hypotheticals, these scenarios that are basically fictional and kind of daydream-like, having them spill over into the real world. And that then leads to all of this planning and writing things down and doing research, right? Now, the court also heard that Gavin Plumb told Mark, his friend in Ireland, that he no longer cared about the risks or consequences. That is because of the level that the fantasy has reached. It's become an addiction, but it's also become a compulsive addiction. And he went on to say, kind of dismissively, the UK prison service is light AF. You know what that means? You're on 23-hour bang up, but you can watch as much as you want, and there are phones are in the cell. So basically saying, if I get caught, how bad can it be? Now, the fact is this particular fellow had actually been essentially incarcerated in his own home because he was so overweight at a certain point. I think he spent 4 years in his home without being able to leave. I think that was following a period where he worked at Pizza Hut and he put on a lot of weight. So obviously he doesn't think too much of being stuck in a room. What's the difference between this room and that room? And yeah, so I guess being in prison isn't so different from being at home, stuck in a lonely, sad sack loser's existence. But what you can see is going on here is he's rationalizing taking this big step. It's committing a very serious crime, sexual crime, and then murder on top of that. Now, what we're dealing with, I suspect, are losers who have become so undesirable, has got so little self-discipline, and their impulsivity has taken over to such an extent that not only have they accepted their involuntary celibate status, and I've written a book focused on perhaps the most infamous incel of them all, Elliot Rodger from Isla Vista, but they've developed a nasty gripe against women. They want payback. And so they seem to feel their only route back to some kind of potency and agency is to take out their grudge against certainly in his case, a specific celebrity. And so he said in a message also read to the court, "Getting her has been my ultimate fantasy for way too long. I'm now at the point that fantasy isn't enough anymore. I want the real thing. Well, there you have it in black and white. You can imagine that Rex Heuermann may have felt exactly the same way. And so how does a person end up getting so far gone? Well, an extreme porn addiction, a humongous amount of time spent daydreaming and drooling and looking at pictures virtually. I mean, it's the epitome of idleness is the devil's workshop, isn't it? Now, according to the Mail Online, a police officer giving evidence said there were millions of images. Now, I don't know if that's overstating things. Like a million. I've got many images on my computer in terms of the books that I've written and the cases that I've covered. But I don't think it comes close to millions, maybe hundreds of thousands. But they're saying millions of images seems a bit like an overstatement, but that's how they put it. Millions of images of the mother of three and other celebrities, and police had only managed to go through about 10% of them. I do think there probably is a shitload of just photos that he's going through. And so his plan was to enter the former This Morning's host on her London property with other obsessive fans. I'm not sure how many, but at least one other person. And they then move her to a dungeon-style room elsewhere in the country where no one could hear her screams, and then repeatedly rape her before murdering her and disposing of her body in a lake. So make no mistake, I think part of what is intended here is to degrade her, and to degrade her so that he feels better about himself. So do you get it? Part of the fantasy isn't just sexual desire. It's violent. It's sadistic. It's the true definition, actually, of sadism, which is deriving pleasure at someone else's expense, except in this case, it costs them everything. It costs them their life, which in a way is, I think, what the perpetrator feels like he's lost. He's lost his social life, a real life, in a sense. And so he wants to take it from someone else in order to get a sense of it himself. He can't make a life or live a life, so he's got to take it. Now, just in case Plum seems like a storm in a teacup, a big talker who's never really going to move on his imaginings, well, it turns out he'd already crossed that line tentatively on a couple of occasions, which shows you he seems to be quite a dangerous fellow. Earlier in the trial, the jury was told that Plum had a couple of other convictions, right? So he's not someone who hasn't broken the law before. He'd been convicted previously for attempted kidnap and also false imprisonment. In 2006, he left a threatening note and tried to force two women off a train with a fake gun. That's seriously crossing the line, and this is quite a long time ago, 18 years ago. And then 16 years ago, in 2008, he had tried to tie up two teenage girls in a Woolworths stockroom. In messages read to the court, Plum discussed his convictions with Mark, saying the attempts had been poorly planned. And so he was trying to take things up a level and basically say, okay, if I plan this right, I'm not going to get caught. As recently as January 2022, Plum posted online, "Getting this bitch is all I can think about. I've wanted this for years. I'm going to be living out my ultimate fantasy." According to the Mirror, Plum's ground floor flat in Pottersfield in Harlow, Essex, including his bedroom, it was this address where Plum plotted and planned and collected his equipment. And that equipment included 2 bottles of chloroform that was discovered by officers who went into the residence. And he basically said that he wanted to use this chloroform to restrain Holly and her husband Dan. Prosecutor Alison Morgan said the defendant lived at the address predominantly alone. So that's another telltale sign. Someone who's just extremely solitary and doesn't have many friends, doesn't have any kind of romantic life, and seems to have given up on the world in a sense. What are they doing behind closed doors? Well, we know what he was doing. Quite surprisingly, he has a son. He was 15 years old at the time. He did visit and stay on occasions. The defendant was working as a security guard and living at this address. The court also heard how Plumb's obsessive behavior extended to women who lived in his local area as well as celebrities. So as I say, Plumb had cobbled together what the court described as a restraint kit involving metal cable ties and handcuffs. In other words, the sort of thing Heuermann likely also had in his basement toolbox. Doesn't it seem as if it was always going to be just a matter of time before Plumb took out his dark impulses on someone when the opportunity arose? Things were coming to a head. Don't you get that sense? Anyway, I'm not going to take it further than that. I will be continuing with a sequel to the Heuermann Deep Dive series. If you're interested in this content in terms of the British audience, go and check out the Heuermann Deep Dive series. Otherwise, I will be continuing with the next analysis coming out later this week, so look out for that. Thank you for listening, and I'll see you guys next time.